All right, it is the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. So hello everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Make Records Management Intelligent with RPA. We appreciate you all being here. First, I'd like to take a second and introduce myself. My name is Matthew Deedon. I am the Senior Product Marketing Manager at Gimel, and I'm joined by our key speaker and CEO, David Quackenbush. But before we get to the webinar, I would like to go through a few housekeeping items. We are recording today's session, and the recording will be available in 24 hours, so we'll be sending an email with the recording to all of our attendees. Also, if you have any questions, please submit them. We'll be having a live Q&A after today's session, and we will answer as many questions as we can get to. And if you have any technical difficulties, please send us a message and let us know so we can help you solve any issues that you might be having. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our speaker today, David Quackenbush.
Great, thank you, Matt. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining the webinar. We got a pretty full agenda today in terms of things to talk about regarding records management and RPA, or robotic process automation. I'll tell y'all right up front that this whole discussion is meant to start to spur thinking and ideas around how you and your companies can start to employ this new class of technology to problems around information governance and records management, and taking care of things that today may be repetitive, may be non-value-added or somewhat non-value-added activities that you have to do every day that RPA technology can really help with. At Gimel, we are looking and continuing to work on how our products can be better automated through RPA, and you'll hear more about that in the future. So I'm going to dive right in and talk about what is RPA. And for those that aren't familiar with RPA, it stands for Robotic Process Automation, and it really represents a new set of technologies that have been around for some time and are starting to gain more and more adoption in the workplace. And this definition is a pretty straightforward one. It's really RPA's job is to mimic human actions by taking on business process and automate these repetitive rules-based tasks that are performed by humans today in a lot of cases. But it's, think of it as the same thing over and over and over again. So, and it may be things that would allow you to accelerate work, because instead of you going to 3 systems to get some information that you're going to apply to something else, the robot actually goes and does that for you, and the bot, however you want to describe it, goes and does that for you and automates that task so that you're just focusing on getting a transaction done more quickly. It's continuous, it's fast to implement and scalable. So again, if you think about RPA and you go, well, gosh, what is this? And is there a robot sitting in my chair and all that kind of good stuff? It is actually, you actually do set these things up in many cases as a desktop user, and it's working kind of right beside you, if you will, in a virtual sense, working on these tasks, or on your desktop, working on these tasks in parallel with things that you're doing on a daily basis. So pretty interesting stuff. There's some great products out there that we'll address later in the presentation, but nevertheless, I think one of the important takeaways from RPA, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as we get into the presentation, is that RPA isn't about anything in particular new. However, RPA is something that you can't just implement it and say it solves your problems. It's not like any kind of new technology that is different than other technologies we've got to do. There's got to be plans, there's got to be changes in business process, and there's got to be change management. All these things that go along with any kind of systems exercise are specifically applicable to RPA and the implementation of that technology. So in doing some research on this, we've been looking at this stuff for quite a while. There's some good business and benefits and business drivers that Gartner actually grabbed this from a Gartner presentation that kind of outline, why people would get into using RPA technology. So things like, hour reduction for FTEs. And so the interesting thing about that, and I think what people are most afraid of with RPA and what you hear is, well, it's going to go through and replace a lot of people's jobs because it's going to basically be able to do everything that I do on my daily tasks. And that's not really the case. The case is really quite different. Is it's going to save you all your time on the things that you do that are mundane, so that you can focus your time on the real problem solving. That might be exception processing. It might be something else that is more value added in your typical work stream than kind of the redundant, mundane stuff. So, you're going to get these benefits of reduced time, productivity increases. Error-free is another great example of something where if you're doing things and you're having to do them by hand, there's the opportunity for mistakes. And if it's repetitive and something's doing it over and over and over again, it eliminates those mistakes almost virtually to zero. I think, again, we talked about this, but it's going to allow people to really upskill their capabilities because they're not going to be spending so much of their time doing rote, mundane things. And additionally, while we get to go to work during daylight hours, these bots can run 24/7 without people being around. Some of the business drivers: quick implementation, low cost of acquisition. Again, these things are, leveraging, these tools are leveraging existing technology. So it's not like you're building brand new applications that have this robotic feature to them. It's actually leveraging a lot of your existing technologies. So actually lowers probably total cost of operation in the organization, and a quick ROI, because again, these things can be done fairly quickly as opposed to these long development cycles because you're building a whole lot of new tech. So where and who and how is RPA being used today? The most visible example, and we won't spend a lot of time on it because it's been the place where people are really starting to get great advantages in accounting processes in particular, and probably the best example is accounts payable. And there are a number of products today that literally embed RPA as part of their accounts payable automation story. So it's big. So any kind of order to cash, procure to pay, those are big ticket items that are being RPA'd today. But there's also a business process that relates to human resources that again fits the pistol of RPA. Certain elements of trading organizations that are going to allow RPA, and there are going to be many other business areas as people start to understand how to deploy this technology in different ways to solve a variety of different problems. So how does that all relate to document-centric processes, auto classification, automating life cycles, and ensuring that we adhere to policy? This is an area where we think there's great opportunity through the methods of RPA to make document-centric processes become higher quality, more consistent, and therefore much more likely to adhere to policy, records policy, security policy, and other compliance policies automatically, which one of the bane for most organizations with unstructured content and applying records policy is getting consistency and getting people to classify content correctly and correctly every time. RPA is clearly going to play a role in this area. So before we go a little bit further, try to distinguish RPA from its kissing cousins, BPA, and now what everybody is starting to call digital process automation, which, depending on who you talk to, is at least the next generation of business process automation, but it might just be a recharacterization of it. And if you look at the comparisons here, BPA focuses on standardizing business process and automation of a business process through workflow. So we can still make mistakes in that process because the machine's just moving a work task from one person to the other. It's not really doing a lot of that work. It's just keeping it in motion. So it manages costs well. It can help with compliance, but humans are involved throughout the process. And again, this will be one of the clear distinctions between BPA and RPA. And it's a good measure for efficiency. And one thing to keep in mind is that RPA is not a replacement for BPA either. They will work hand in hand. They will work and complement each other. You could imagine that tools like Nintex and K2 and other BPA type tools will have a nice integration with running robotic processes as part of a standard workflow in an organization. So on the RPA side, you know, you're going to get much greater acceleration because again, you have to think about the RPA part is how much of this work can I take the human element out of and just completely automate through the motions of the robot or bot, if you will. So the human error goes almost down to zero. Accuracy is way up, costs go down. The human focus now isn't about just continuing to click through my inbox in my queue, working items. It's now focused on really just my exceptions. How do I really manage the things and work on the things and fix the things that just can't be done automatically by something behind the scenes? And it really is implementing efficiency. So again, I think we're going to just address this in a second, but RPA isn't about just implementing and automating and accelerating bad business processes. This is, again, another opportunity to look at how one does things and continue to add efficiencies into how people do various different business activities. And another big buzzword for all of us in artificial intelligence and machine learning, RPA actually can accelerate this. You know, one of the things, and this is particularly true in the unstructured world, artificial intelligence requires a large data set to be effective. And on top of that, it requires a pretty high quality large data set to be effective. So again, if you think about one of the tasks that RPA can perform, is really helping to, over time, run and continue to improve the quality of the information, of the unstructured information out there, so that AI and ML and machine learning type tools can actually do more with the content available in the organization. So a quick kind of historical point of view of where things went and where they are now from an adoption journey. I mean, you know, this starts way back to core systems, whether it's your CRM, your ERP, your content management system, document management systems, whatever you want to call them. It starts there. It embeds the concepts of collaboration. So there's workflow and forms and reports. It incorporates ideas around, you know, where we were just a few years ago when everyone started to move into more of an app-driven world. And, you know, the first introduction of these, you know, bots, whether they were much use or not, or single-purpose bots and things like that. And of course, mobile, all the extensions out to the field for all these field-enabled applications that were really being made useful through this app model concept. We've transitioned into intelligent automation, and then we're here now at machine automation with things like DPA, RPA, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. All those things now really kind of fall into this category. So specifically for our discussion is, why is RPA good for records management? And the first place to start, we've used this slide before, is that there's, you know, content throughout the organization that needs identifying and needs policy applied to it, not just in the known repositories that people have been working in and the official repositories of record that people are supposed to be putting content in, but it actually exists everywhere, and there are records everywhere in the organization. We, along with many others, use the term dark data to refer to all this unstructured information and information in general that exists in the four corners of the organization that are unknown or virtually unknown to most people. And RPA now can start to say, in each of these areas, a silo of information, I want to start moving that silo of information into my official repository or repositories. RPA is going to be a great tool to help with a lot of that. Moving unmanaged repositories into our official repositories. Again, you know, the repetitive nature, and if you think about an unmanaged repository, maybe it's an open share drive, maybe it's something else, maybe it's legacy systems that had very little metadata associated with them when it was implemented. And now I've got to try to get this stuff figured out and moved and having policy applied or moved into proper record repositories. Again, you know, RPA is going to be great at that because it's going to require some auto classification to actually make that move occur. You're not just going to be lifting and shifting. It's got to actually add intelligence to the document or to the piece of content on its way to the official repository. And again, as we've kind of discussed briefly, then you've kind of just got this whole concept of dark data and how do I continue to identify it, make sense of it, and apply policy to it with as much automation as possible, knowing that 100% is the holy grail. So here's a couple of comments. You know, number one, we talked about this, RPA is going to reduce the mundane work associated with RM and really allowing records managers to focus what's really more important to them, which is control over documents in the organization, both electronic and physical, that must be preserved as business records. Getting rid of all the mundane work will greatly improve the work process of records managers, but at the same time, improve the quality of it as well. It's going to simplify consistent classification challenge by being able to automate a lot of this auto classification. So there's a lot of talk about auto classification today, and there's tools out there that attempt to do some of this auto classification, but the truth is, good auto classification is a repetitive task because again, you know, as you start to look at documents, sometimes you can extract metadata very easily, sometimes you can't, and you're going to have to kind of put it through multiple cycles in order to really get that quality of auto classification extracted out of a document. And again, being able to do it consistently where there's no errors because the machine knows what the rules are and the machine constantly applies the rules to apply the right kind of metadata. And so this also then fits with the bigger picture, which is while retention is important, so are things like security and compliance and findability, and being able to, again, consistently apply metadata to address those challenges. All these things are things that we know about, but people typically don't like to do. And so they don't do them, or they don't do them very well when they're bringing content into the organization. So in preparing this presentation, somebody asked, so, you know, what does that mean to, hey, we're going to uncover dark data with RPA? And I kind of think of it this way. It's like peeling an onion. That, you know, the first thing you've got to do is you've got to find the information you're looking for. You've got to know all the places that it exists, and then you've got to identify it. And how do I identify it? Well, today I might mean, you know, a 100-person task force going through and opening these documents up or looking at them and trying to ascertain something about them. And then they're going to go through a process of enrichment and say, well, you know, at this step I can at least quickly put one piece of metadata on here that says this is a contract, or something else, or this belongs to the Southwest region, or something like that. And then from there, I can move to the next step and maybe add more intelligence to it, because I might now be able to take that and say, well, this is a Southwest region contract, and I need to look at the document and say, oh, well, it looks like the counterparty is so-and-so, and I can add that by using some of the search-related auto-classification tools that are full-text search-driven. And then from there, I can apply more rules, and I can say, oh, look, if this is counterparty X, I can go read a master data system and get more intelligence from that, and so the cycle continues over and over. And so again, this is perfect work for an RPA-enabled business process. Most of these things are things that mimic what human beings have to do every day in order to properly classify content, and they're repetitive, and they're common, and they can be automated. So what are some technologies out there in the marketplace? There are literally a whole group of technologies now calling themselves RPA. So I think first and foremost, you have to kind of get through the jargon that everybody's going to use to try to attach themselves to RPA and start really thinking about what are the leading technologies that actually do RPA, because there's a difference. And a lot of people will be able to claim they do RPA and then only to peel back the covers, and it's really just another form of single stroke automation as opposed to the broad capabilities of these RPA tools. So leading technologies that we're very familiar with, and there are others. These aren't the only ones, but UiPath, Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism, Pega. I think these are pretty much almost now becoming common knowledge as the leading vendors in this space. And if you talk to people that are doing it today, more than likely they're working with one of those top three for sure, and probably Pega as well is going to come up in your conversation. So there's already a lot of activity going on in large organizations trying to figure out how to get better use out of these technologies to extend and leverage their existing investments in systems today. So how do you get started with RPA, and what is RPA any different than any other kind of systems project? And we don't think so, really. I mean, it's like any other new platform you're going to introduce into your organization. You've got to lay out your plan, and you got to figure out what are my target business processes. So that's an important activity, and then I've got to figure out, what about my business process that I'm automating needs repair before I just automate it, because automating bad process is still bad process. It doesn't fix anything. So you still have to do the work to fix your bad business process before you automate it. Then you have to kind of decide how candidates get prioritized, because just like anything else in the IT stack, a lot of ideas are going to start bubbling up, and people have got to figure out, well, where is the best ROI? Where is the best return on this? Where am I going to get the most benefit, both in efficiency and effectiveness? What kind of standards are we going to need to deploy so that bots, when I'm creating them, are all done in a similar fashion so they're easier to maintain and support over the long haul? How do my projects look? Do I set up my project processes differently? Agile is becoming a pretty important methodology for a lot of the clients that we work with anyway, and how does this feed into the Agile process and make it even more effective? And last but not least, change management. Because if you think about disruptive change, RPA is definitely going to bring some disruptive change to the workplace. And the first thing it's going to probably do is get a lot of people concerned that this automation is going to eliminate their job. So change management and effective change management has to be a critical element of any kind of RPA initiative you're going to charter. And it's not for everything and everyone. Again, you can't just sit there and think that you can apply this to everything. RPA projects are going to be failures just like any other project by not dealing with the things we just discussed. And it's not for everything. And so it's just important to identify in your organization what things really don't make sense to RPA, because it's easy enough to, on paper, go, yeah, we can automate this, but again, you have to really kind of understand why you'd want to do that and what you're going to get out of it, because it's not going to be for every type of process out there. So here's a couple of examples to get you thinking about this in a little bit deeper level. First, let me talk about governance real quick. Sorry about that. First and foremost, on the governance front, again, RPA doesn't eliminate the need for a governance plan and a good governance plan to make it successful. So It's operational governance, it's technology governance, it's risk management, it's measurements. All these things have to be incorporated into the RPA strategy for them to be effective in your organization. So a couple of examples. Here's an HR example that deals with thousands of leave of absence requests per month, and how an RPA solution was devised that read the request, validated it, extracted additional information from other systems, processed the request through all the different people that needed to approve it, so it incorporated existing workflow, updated the employee file with an approved leave document, so now it had to create a document that had a digital signature on it that says this leave has been officially approved and added to the file, and then notifying the appropriate people that this leave actually has been approved and is in process or will be in process. This actual example reduced the processing time of the leave by 80%. The error rate went to 0, and the client achieved an ROI in less than 6 months. And an RPA doesn't have to be for every complicated business process. It also can apply to very simplistic things, automating very simplistic but recurring things. So think about adding a document to a SharePoint library. You know, an end user comes in and says, I'm going to click on an add button and add a document to SharePoint. That wakes up a desktop bot, and that bot then launches a business application where metadata is going to exist. So the end user clicks that, says, this is for lease 27B. The bot goes up to the lease application and knows it's a lease application and says, I need to see the metadata, the information around lease 27B. It scrapes that metadata from the app, adds the metadata to the proper columns in the SharePoint site, finalizes the document add. So again, this was all done in an automation with the human sitting right there. So the bot was working in the background on the same desktop as the person adding the document. So processing time went way down. Probably most importantly is that metadata was applied consistently, so no chance for error, and eliminated a lot of manual steps that the end user had to do by going and launching that application themselves and trying to cut and paste or hand enter this metadata. Search, an even simpler example. Daily work process requires both transaction and content-based information. So in this case, an end user sitting in their daily system of record, maybe it's SAP, maybe it's some other business system, and they want to launch a search in SharePoint to look at related documents to particular activities. So maybe it's an accounts payable activity, or maybe it's some kind of workflow around work order management. And so they want to see all the related documents to this completed work order. So the end user launches a search screen button in SharePoint, and the bot wakes up, takes over, and runs the search query from scraped keywords from the system they're using, the work order management system they're using, and the end result is the user sees the requisite documents back in that search. And again, just pretty simple stuff. Save time is the main result, but it was all done with a click of a button and the bot doing all the rest of the work to get that return set to the client, to the end user. So those were some examples to get you thinking that there's not really the point being, there's not really a focus on, you have to have this ultra complicated business process to really get value out of RPA. You can get value out of RPA by repeating and making repetitive, very simple business areas as well, and business processes that make work more efficient, make it more fun, because again, people are spending time on what matters and spending time on solving problems and working through challenges as opposed to looking for information. So that was it for us. I think we've left some time for questions. appreciate everybody's attention, and I'll open the floor to questions now.
Yeah, so if everyone during this Q&A portion, you can click on that Q&A button. You should see that there on your screen, and you can submit any questions you may have. We already do have some coming in, David, so I'm going to go ahead and read these in the order that they were received. First one is, can you provide examples of BPA and RPA to clarify these differences? Obviously, we went through those RPA examples, so I guess if you could provide some form of BPA example, that will help clarify the difference between those two.
Well, think of a BPA example. So think of products like Nintex and K2 and just standard workflow that says, hey, I've got to so say in the old days, early days of accounts payable automation, a document comes in, it gets scanned, it gets routed to a queue. The queue says, this is from Chevron, so this goes over to Matt because he needs to approve it. And then Matt approves it and looks at it and says approved. And then the RPA or BPA tool says, oh, look, this was a $100,000 invoice. Matt only has the ability to approve $25,000 invoices. So now I need to route it to Matt's boss to get that approval. So that would be a pretty simplistic example of BPA. But I think you can think of any sort of linear workflow that attempts to move work steps from one person to the next in a sort of sequential fashion, although sometimes you can break these things up and parallelize them as well.
Great. Next question is, does the bot monitor the transaction system for changes and update the linked metadata when indicated?
So repeat that one again.
A little bit of a tongue twister there. Does the bot monitor the transaction system for changes and update the linked metadata when indicated?
So if I understand the question correctly, depending on the situation, it certainly could. I think there's systems that actually can do that today, where it's looking at various transaction systems, and when updates occur, it's going and taking action on something else. So with an RPA bot, there's no reason why that couldn't occur.
Next question is, can you please elaborate on business application on your auto classification example? What does it exactly do? Does it identify patterns in documents and pull out the metadata?
So in auto classification, think about how companies sort of do that today with basic expression testing when they're doing full text search in a document and starting to extract keywords or other terms like that. The holy grail of all this is that over time, with AI and other tools, that documents get searched and the patterns continue to get updated so that they become more consistent and more real from a metadata application standpoint. But yeah, generally speaking, you're going to be using these search tools. That would be one of the things that the bot would execute, is these deep search tools that would constantly be extracting metadata and comparing it and then utilizing it as part of the classification step.
Great.
That might have been too much of the answer.
No, that was perfect. And so I'm going to take a quick, I'm going to switch gears here and go look at the survey. By now, most of you should have seen a survey pop up on your screen. And I just wanted to go through some of the responses really quick with you, Quack, on what people are essentially filling out. So the first question here is your organization currently planning on enhancing information governance with RPA? 29% of people said no, but I'd like to change that, and 12% of people said yes.
Okay.
So I think that's very good. We're definitely seeing that switch. The second one is, what pains are you currently experiencing with your records management process? Now, 41% of our attendees answered physical and electronic records are managed separately.
Okay.
And then second, 24% is inability to apply policies across multiple systems. I think that is something that we see fairly common and something that we definitely enjoy addressing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that sounds pretty standard for what we see with most of our clients. And I think that, and again, when you think about the application of policy, and when you think about auto classification, when you think about all the things that people don't like to do, with content, and that by people, I don't mean records managers, I mean the people that are capturing this content at the point of entry into the organization, whether it's creating new documents or bringing things on board, is they don't like to do those things, and they don't like to do them for a lot of reasons. Part of it is they don't know what to do, which is a lot of it. Part of it is it's depending on how the system was originally established, can be quite painful because some people think a lot of metadata is needed to classify any particular document, and all that just adds burden to the end user's task, so they're likely going to do an average job of it or ignore it altogether if they can to get through the rest of their day and the process things that are important to them.
Funny.
This is where RPA is going to, I think, be a big game changer.
Funny enough, that actually steers into our final survey question here, which is how often does your organization rely primarily on end users to supply metadata to digital content? 47% of our attendees said always.
Yeah.
And then 29% said usually. So only 12% of attendees marked never. So I think that kind of goes into the feedback you just provided, that is one of the main issues when it comes to applying metadata to digital content.
Yeah, and it's, you know, we all know the stories here. I mean, I think people on this call have all been through the wars. Probably the biggest challenge is getting people to classify content that they're working with and are adding, particularly if it's a lot. And so if you can automate that, if you can use tools to simplify that but still make it high quality and still produce the results you want, you know, and the tendency is to say, oh, well, we'll just go with a minimum, and that minimum we can kind of find in the surrounding area, but that usually doesn't cut it. Usually you still need to get master data systems and other things involved to really get the richness of metadata, even if it's a handful of things that most organizations really need when they're trying to manage content.
Yep. All right, if there are no more questions, I think we will go ahead and conclude our session today. So I hope everyone enjoyed the webinar. And again, if you have any more questions or anything you'd like to ask us, or so reach out to David or I directly. We have our emails listed there, or you can contact us at our website at www.gimel.com. Once again, we will send this recording to everyone within 24 to 48 hours, and we hope you join us again for our next webinar. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, y'all.